You know Etsy, right? That cozy little corner of the internet for handmade gifts and unique crafts. Well, it turns out that behind that charming storefront, there's a pretty wild financial horror story unfolding. This is a story about corporate cannibalism. What happens when a company gets so focused on its stock price that it starts to, well, eat the very community that made it special in the first place. So let's pull back the curtain and see what's really going on.
Okay, so to really get what happened to Etsy, we've got to start at the end, with the absolutely bizarre state of its finances by 2025. I mean, it's a puzzle that just doesn't seem to make sense.
Check this out. By 2025, Etsy had a stockholders' deficit of over $1 billion. Now, what does that mean in plain English? It means the company's liabilities, what it owed, were bigger than its assets, what it owned. Technically, the company was in the red. It owed more than it was worth. That's not a great sign. But here's where it gets really weird. While Etsy was technically insolvent, what was it doing? It was spending a mind-boggling $777 million in that same year buying back its own stock. Now, companies do this all the time to pump up their stock price, but for a company this deep in a hole, it's a really, really bold move. And that right there is the big question, isn't it? How on earth does a company that's technically broke go on a massive stock buying spree, often using debt to do it? This is the kind of financial magic trick we're going to unravel. And to do that, we need to rewind the clock and remember what Etsy was supposed to be.
See, Etsy wasn't always about these crazy financials. It started with a simple, powerful idea, an idea that gave it a real soul.
This was their whole reason for being: keep commerce human. It was founded back in 2005 in a Brooklyn apartment, and the whole point was to be the exact opposite of giant, faceless e-commerce sites. It was supposed to be a community, a place where you could buy something from a real person who actually made it. They were competing with soul, not just price.
Yeah, but here's the thing about good feelings. They don't exactly impress Wall Street. After Etsy went public in 2015, it was still losing money. So in 2017, they brought in a new CEO, Josh Silverman, a real pragmatist whose job was pretty simple: whip this business into shape.
And wow, did he deliver. Just look at this turnaround. Silverman poured money into things like search and marketing, and it worked. GMS, that's just the total value of everything sold on the site, it more than doubled. He took a company that was losing money and made it profitable, all without destroying what made it special. By the start of 2020, it looked like Etsy had found that perfect balance. And then, well, everything changed.
The COVID-19 pandemic should have been the best thing that ever happened to Etsy. It was this incredible gift, a once-in-a-generation boom. But that gift, it turned out to be poisoned. It set off a chain reaction that would lead the company to start eating itself alive.
I mean, these numbers are just insane. In 2020, the world shut down, and everybody rushed to Etsy for face masks, for home decor, for everything. Sales and revenue more than doubled in just 1 year. The company was absolutely flooded with cash.
And all that revenue? It sent profits through the roof, up over 264%. Management saw this as a turning point. They were flush with cash, full of confidence, and they went on a spending spree. But they also started looking at their sellers in a new way, not as partners, but as a resource to be mined for more revenue.
And this is where they made their first big move. In early 2022, Etsy jacked up its transaction fee by 30%. The strategy was shifting. Instead of just trying to grow the whole pie, the new focus was on taking a much bigger slice of it from the very people who baked it. The extraction was on.
At the exact same time, Etsy took all that pandemic cash and made a huge bet. They spent over $1.6 billion to buy the fashion resale app Depop. The big idea was to build a house of brands. It was a bold move, for sure, but one that would go sour fast.
So here's what that all looks like in practice. Think about it like this. Before the pandemic, for every dollar you spent on Etsy, the company took about 17 cents. By 2025, after all the fee hikes and new ad programs, that number jumped to 24 cents. They were growing their revenue by literally taking a bigger cut from their sellers.
So what happens when you shift from growing a community to just extracting value from it? Well, you get some pretty damaging consequences. This is where you can really see the cannibalism in action, as the whole marketplace starts to fray at the edges.
When the sellers organized a strike to protest the fee hikes, Etsy's response said it all. They just dismissed it, claiming it had no material impact. And while that might have been true for that quarter's balance sheet, it sent a really clear message. The relationship between the platform and its creators was broken.
And then came the post-pandemic hangover. All those buyers who had flocked to the site during lockdown, they started to drift away. By 2025, the number of active buyers had dropped by over 10% from its peak. And the sellers, they left in even bigger numbers. We're talking nearly 2 million sellers gone from the platform between its peak and 2025. So you've got the marketplace shrinking from both sides, fewer creators making unique stuff and fewer buyers there to see it. The whole thing was being hollowed out from the inside. Oh, and remember that big House of Brands idea? That huge Depop acquisition? Well, it was a spectacular flameout. In 2026, Etsy sold Depop for about $430 million less than what they paid for it just a few years earlier. A massive value-destroying blunder.
After that, the dominoes started to fall, and they fell fast. First, layoffs hit the company. Then, a powerful activist investor showed up and took a board seat, which is Wall Street's way of saying, we're not happy. And finally, in late 2025, CEO Josh Silverman, the same guy who saved the company years before, stepped down. The turnaround artist became a victim of his own strategy.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Etsy was built on this beautiful idea that commerce could be human. But its story is a perfect example of the pressure public companies are under to turn everything, even a community of artists, into just another line on a spreadsheet, something to be squeezed for profit. And it leaves us with this one big question. What's actually left when a company built on community decides to eat its own?